Have you ever thought that some people walk out of hell not to seek revenge, but to learn how to love themselves again? This story begins on a winter night in New York, where a woman once knelt amid the laughter of a glittering crowd, only to rise years later in the radiant light of justice and compassion. This isn't a story about power. It's a story about dignity, forgiveness, and how a shattered heart can become a light source for the world. If you believe that every pain carries a reason to be healed, stay with me till the end, because the story of Ashley Holloway is one you won't forget. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to walk with me through the journey of a woman who turned darkness into light. That night, New York shimmered like a postcard. Snow drifted softly over Fifth Avenue, reflecting the warm golden glow from old buildings. From afar, Christmas music flowed out from the Grand Livingston Hotel, where the biggest winter gala of the season was taking place. The elite gathered inside the ballroom, lined with glass and crystal, their evening gowns and tuxedos glittering beneath the massive chandeliers. The air was thick with expensive perfume, laughter, and the crisp sound of clinking wine glasses. Amid that dazzling scene, Ashley Holloway Short stood still. A silver satin gown hugged her slender frame, almost too beautiful to belong to her. Like everything else in her life, someone else had chosen the dress. Matthew Short, her husband, the man the city called the real estate prince of Manhattan. To Ashley, he was simply the man who had turned their home into a gilded cage. The annual Christmas gala, hosted by the Short family, was a charity event for their private hospital. Journalists, politicians, investors, the familiar faces of Wall Street all attended. Everyone knew Matt was the star of the evening, while his wife, the girl from the working class, was just a shadow at his side. Ashley stood by the champagne table, eyes tracing the light gliding across the marble floor. In that opulent atmosphere, she felt herself fading away. The greetings, the fake smiles, the cutting glances. She heard the whispers, "Is she still around?" A soft chuckle followed. Ashley heard it all, but said nothing. She was used to it. Matt entered the crowd like a celebrity, his smile radiant, surrounded by business partners. He was drunk on success, having just signed a multi-million-dollar deal. When his gaze met Ashley's, there was no warmth, only possession, cold, sharp. "What are you doing just standing there?" Matt said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Come here, don't stand like a statue. You're embarrassing me." Ashley walked closer, a glass of champagne trembling slightly in her hand. The onlookers watched, half smiling, intrigued. Matt leaned down, his voice lower. "Your shoes are dirty. Can't you see? These are important guests." She glanced down, just a faint smudge barely visible. "They're fine, Matt." He gave a thin smile that chilled her to the bone. "Fine? What do you know about fine?" "Clean them." "Right now?" "Right now." The words echoed through the microphone just as the band stopped playing. The ballroom fell silent. Ashley froze. Matt's eyes ordered her, his polite smile never fading. He raised his hand, as if this were some harmless marital joke. Ashley's heart pounded. She felt hundreds of eyes cutting into her. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. "Come on, honey," Matt said lightly. "I'm just teasing. Or are you afraid to get your hands dirty?" A laugh broke from the corner of the room, then another, until it spread a cold wave of mockery. Women in gowns laughed. Men laughed. The sound rippled through the glittering air. Ashley took a deep breath, picked up a napkin from the table, and knelt. She wiped the invisible speck from Matt's polished black shoes. Her hands trembled. Inside, something broke beyond repair. Camera flashes flickered. Someone captured the moment. The click of the shutter echoed through the heavy air. Matt looked down, smiling faintly. "Good. You can stand now." Ashley rose, her face pale. The laughter and chatter resumed, as if nothing had happened. But her world had collapsed. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She heard nothing, saw nothing, only the pounding of her own heart. When the clock struck midnight, Ashley quietly left the ballroom and stepped into the snow. She carried no purse, only the key to her old home and shoes, soaked with melted ice. Outside, New York was freezing. Wind whipped down the avenue, slicing through her thin coat. The city lights shimmered across her tear-streaked face. She wandered through the bright streets past taxis, horns, drunken laughter. Ashley felt nothing. She only knew one thing: she had just lost the last piece of herself, her dignity. She walked until her feet ached. Around 2 a.m., she stopped at Times Square, where the LED screens blazed like daylight. On the giant billboards, faces of billionaires smiled. Headlines flashed about fortunes and deals. She realized she was nothing but a shadow in that ocean of light and people. A gust of wind made her shiver. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the city she'd lived in for 3 years but never belonged to. In her mind, her mother's voice surfaced, faint like an echo from a distant past. If you have nothing left, you still have yourself. But she wondered, did she still have herself? Her phone buzzed. A message from Matt. "Don't make a scene. Come back now. Don't make me come get you." She stared at the screen, then turned the phone off. A small gesture, but something inside her shifted. Ashley took a deep breath and looked up at the towering skyline. In that vast world, she was just a grain of sand. But for the first time, that grain wanted to drift its own way. She walked toward the nearest subway station and paid for a ticket with the last few coins in her wallet. The train arrived. The gust of air rushed through, tossing her hair. When the doors opened, she stepped in and sat in the back. Across from her sat a middle-aged man in a worker's uniform, tired but kind-eyed. He looked at her, then pulled a half sandwich from his pocket. "Hungry, miss?" Ashley hesitated. "I'm fine. Take it. You look like you haven't eaten all day." She took it, whispering thanks. It was cold, dry, plain, but to Ashley, it was the best meal she'd had in years. It was the first time in a long time that someone had given her something without wanting anything back. "Where do you work?" she asked. "Queen's Depot. Subway maintenance," he said with a soft smile. "Name's Frank. You?" "Ashley." "Where are you headed at this hour, Ashley?" "I don't know." She glanced down at her wet shoes, voice hoarse. "I just know I can't go back." Frank nodded gently. "Then don't. Sometimes leaving is the only way to survive." At the last stop, Frank stood and waved. "Stay warm, young lady. God always gives us one more chance, even a small one." Ashley sat there, tears slipping down her face. Around her, the station emptied. The flickering lights above hummed softly, the echoes fading like a lullaby. By dawn, she boarded a bus heading toward the outskirts. Through the window, the pale winter sun spilled over rows of red brick buildings, lighting her weary face. She clutched an old iron key in her coat pocket, the only thing her mother had left her. She didn't know if that house still stood, but it was the only place she could call home. And somewhere deep within her exhaustion, a tiny seed stirred not hope, not yet, but a quiet knowing. Every beginning starts the moment you dare to leave everything behind. Outside the window, the snow had begun to melt. The city faded behind her, smaller and smaller. Ashley Holloway, the woman once forced to kneel in a glittering ballroom, now sat alone on an old bus, bound for nowhere. But for the first time in years, she felt free. The Short family's mansion on Park Avenue was so vast that footsteps echoed like in a museum. The walls were lined with oil paintings, chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the corridors stretched long enough for a person to walk a full minute without meeting another soul. It was a beautiful house, but cold. That was where Ashley had lived for 3 years. 3 years in which she slowly disappeared daily. When she first married Matthew, the press called her a modern-day fairy tale. A poor girl, once a shop assistant at a small fashion boutique, is marrying the heir to a real estate empire. Newspapers wrote about her radiant smile at the wedding, the endless train of her white gown, and the celebrity guests. What they didn't know was that right after that perfect photograph, Ashley's life had quietly ended. Ashley once believed happiness would come in the main bedroom on the 3rd floor, where the morning light filtered through heavy curtains. However, Matt began to change only a few weeks after the wedding. Not suddenly, but gradually, like someone dimming one light after another in a grand house. First, he took control of their finances. "Don't buy anything without asking me first. You don't understand money," he said gently, almost as if teaching her. Then came her time. "Don't go out so much. A good wife belongs at home." Then her friends. "I don't like those people. They're using you. Then her voice. Stop arguing. I'm tired of your pointless words. Each time she tried to resist, he looked at her with that mix of pity and disdain. Can't you see I'm trying to teach you how to live better? His mother, Diane Short, always smiled with her velvet soft voice. My dear, strong men sometimes need quiet women to keep the home steady. A wise woman doesn't need to win with words, only to keep the peace. Ashley once believed that. She tried to smile through the elegant dinners, act grateful when Matt gave her jewelry, and hide her tears when he belittled her in front of his friends. Then she learned not to speak at all, not to ask, not to argue, not to share, to exist quietly. In the mornings, she walked through the garden, listening to birds instead of people. At noon, she read in the vast, empty living room. Matt came home late at night, glued to his laptop, talking to employees and partners but never looking into her eyes once. Sometimes, she stared into the mirror, trying to recognize herself. Pale lips, empty eyes. She had almost forgotten what her own voice sounded like. One evening at dinner, Matt asked, "So, what do you think of the meal tonight?" Ashley smiled faintly. "It's good. I didn't ask for praise," he said. "I asked if you still know how to feel anything." Diane chuckled. "My son has such a sense of humor." No one noticed Ashley's hand trembling beneath the table. She had once tried to leave just once. 2 years ago. She'd packed a small bag and called for a taxi. But before she could step out, Matt appeared. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He stood there, watching her. "Go ahead," he said. "But remember, no one out there wants you. You're just the orphan I picked up. Don't forget that." She didn't go. The door closed, and from that night on, she never tried again. In her secret journal, she wrote, "Day 601. I talk to myself so I won't forget the sound of my own voice. I look out the window to remind myself that light's still out there." Every time she wrote, she hid the notebook in the bottom drawer. A tiny act of rebellion, just enough to remind her she still existed. By the 3rd year of her marriage, Ashley had become a shadow in her home. The new maids called her Mrs. Short but never met her eyes. When she walked the halls, they stepped aside. When she appeared at parties, people looked through her as if she were invisible. But in that silence, something was beginning to shift. One October morning, while organizing books in the small library, Ashley found a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, her mother's old gift. The cover was frayed, but on the first page, her mother's handwriting remained. "For Ashley, my daughter, when you feel small, remember, your pride can save you." Ashley sank to the floor and began to read. The story of Elizabeth Bennet, a woman brave enough to love and to keep her dignity in a world obsessed with power, made her heart tremble. It had been so long since she last cried, not from pain, but from the realization that her pride wasn't dead yet beneath the ashes of fear. Matt hosted a small dinner party at home with a few business friends that evening. Ashley sat quietly, as always. They laughed, talked, and as usual made her the subject of a joke. One man looked at her and said, "Your wife's always this quiet, Matt." Matt shrugged. "She's used to it. The less she talks, the fewer mistakes she makes." Laughter filled the room. Ashley stared into her glass of red wine, its light shimmering like blood. And in that moment, her mother's words echoed, "Your pride can save you." She set down her glass for the first time in years and stood up. The room fell silent. "Excuse me," she said softly but clearly. "I'm not feeling well." Matt raised an eyebrow. "Sit down. Don't embarrass me." "No," Ashley said, her voice calm but steady. "I just don't want to sit here one more minute." No one spoke. She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked down the long corridor, strong, defiant. Upstairs, she locked the bedroom door and leaned against the wall. Her heart pounded with fear, but also with freedom. That night, she opened her drawer and took out the journal. She wrote, "Day 895. Today, I spoke one sentence, small but real. I still exist." Day by day, she began reclaiming tiny pieces of herself, opening the curtains, choosing her clothes, and buying flowers for her room. Matt remained cold, Diane controlling, but Ashley was learning how to breathe again. And then came that third Christmas night. The night of the shoes, The night everything fell apart. But for Ashley, it was also the first night she finally saw how completely she'd been destroyed and why she had to leave. On the bus out of Manhattan that cold morning, with snow still clinging to the windows, she thought of those 3 long years, the silent meals, sleepless nights, the words that cut like knives. Yet deep inside, she felt something unexpected: gratitude. Without darkness, she would never have understood the value of light. She looked out the window and saw the first sunrise on the horizon. Its pale pink hue reflected across the Hudson, soft as a promise. And in that moment, Ashley Holloway knew her journey had only just begun. New York in late December carries a cold that doesn't come from the weather but loneliness. The wind sweeps between glass towers, slips under coats, and cuts through every layer of wool until it reaches the most fragile part of a person. Ashley Holloway knew that cold because she felt it more deeply than ever. That morning, she left the subway station in Midtown, where she'd spent the entire night. She hadn't slept. She'd just sat and watched the endless stream of strangers' faces without names, eyes full of hurry. Her shoes were soaked, her hands cracked from the cold, her stomach empty. She had no plan, no direction. She only knew one thing. She would never return to Park Avenue, to that mansion that stood still and proud, a monument to arrogance. The faint morning light filtered through the fog and exhaust. She walked along the avenue, past shuttered boutiques closed for the holidays. A glass storefront reflected the image of a woman in a thin coat, hair disheveled, face pale with cold. She almost didn't recognize herself. Ashley walked until she reached Queensboro Bridge, then stopped. Below her, the East River was black and glacial. For a moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind: just one step, and all the pain would vanish. But then her mother's voice echoed in her head. "You may fall, Ashley, but never let anyone else define who you are." She sank on the steps, tears mixing with falling snow. Exhaustion seeped through her bones. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting when a voice broke through the wind. "You okay, miss?" Ashley looked up. A man in a subway worker's uniform stood there. His coat smelled of oil and smoke, his hands rough and cracked. His face was sun-worn, creased with deep lines. He held a paper coffee cup and a small paper bag. "You look cold," he said in a low voice. "I've got an extra sandwich. You want it?" Ashley shook her head weakly, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. The man smiled softly, opened the bag, and offered half a sandwich. "Take it. Name's Frank. Frank Miller. I work the E-line. I've eaten enough. Help me out, yeah?" She took it carefully. "Thank you. Don't mention it," he said. New Yorkers look out for each other. The sandwich was cold, but to Ashley, it tasted better than any gala dinner she'd ever had, because someone gave her something for the first time in years without wanting anything in return. "Do you live around here?" Frank asked. "No," she said hesitantly. I just left home." He paused, studying her. "You got somewhere to go?" She said nothing. Frank nodded as if he understood. "There's a church in Queens," he said quietly. "They keep it open all night. You can rest there. They won't ask questions. There's a heater too." Ashley nodded. "I'll remember." Frank pulled up his collar. "New York's tough, miss, but it's fair. You fight to live, it'll give you a chance." Ashley managed a faint smile. "Thank you, Frank. Just promise me one thing," he said, walking away. "Don't waste that sandwich." She sat there for a long time when he was gone, staring after him. In the biting wind, something inside her warmed not from the food, but from the rare kindness of a stranger. She walked toward Queens, over the bridge, through neighborhoods smaller and poorer but alive with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals drifting from small apartments. When she reached her stepmother's apartment, Regina Walker, she hesitated before the peeling door. She knocked. Regina opened it, eyes wide, then frowned. "Ashley? My God, you look like a homeless girl." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Ashley said softly. "I just need a place to sleep." One night, Regina glanced behind her, a cramped apartment. 2 kids asleep in the next room. "You left Matt, didn't you?" "Yes." The woman sighed, looking around uneasily. "Ashley, you know I can't. If the Shorts find out I took you in, it'll cause trouble. I don't want that." Ashley bit her lip. I understand. You should go back. Apologize, Regina said quickly. They're rich. You can't live on the streets forever. Ashley looked at her, this woman who taught her to endure, to stay sensible. Slowly, she said, I'm not going back. Don't be stubborn like your mother, Regina snapped. You know how that ended. She got nothing. She got me, Ashley said quietly, her voice steady. She turned and walked away. Regina didn't call after her. The door shut behind her with a dull thud, leaving Ashley in the freezing night. And yet, she didn't feel cold anymore. She spotted a small church on the empty street, the one Frank had mentioned. The door was slightly open, spilling warm golden light onto the snow. She stepped inside. An old priest nodded in greeting, asked nothing, and handed her a blanket. Ashley curled up on a wooden pew. From somewhere in the distance, a choir sang softly. The statue of the Virgin Mary smiled down with gentle kindness. That night, Ashley slept peacefully for the first time in years, not because she was safe, but because she had finally stopped running from herself. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the church windows, painting everything in warm gold. Ashley opened her eyes and felt different, not strong yet, but awake. And in that quiet clarity came one thought: find her old home. That afternoon, she took a train toward Hudson Valley, a suburb more than an hour from Manhattan. The city lights faded in the window behind her, dim and distant. Snow still fell, softer now. She rested her head against the glass, watching bare winter trees slide past. That was where she had grown up with her mother, Miriam Holloway. The little white house with an attic, a garden of wild daisies, and a window overlooking the Hudson River. She hadn't been back in nearly 10 years. When she stepped off the train, the wind was sharp enough to sting her face. She pulled her collar close and walked 2 miles down a road blanketed in dead leaves. When the house came into view, her chest tightened. It was old now, the roof chipped, windows coated in dust but still standing, as if waiting for her return. The door creaked open after a few turns of the key. The air inside smelled of dust and memories. She walked down the hallway, her fingers brushing the walls. Everything was just as she remembered. Her mother's framed photo still sat on the table, the silver frame tarnished with age. Up in the attic, a pale light streamed through the cracks. Ashley climbed the stairs, past old boxes and suitcases blanketed in dust. Then she saw a small metal box hidden beneath a pile of papers. On the lid, a yellowed note read, "For Ashley, when you need it most." Her hands trembled as she opened it. A thin layer of dust rose into the air. Inside lay a folded letter, a sealed envelope, and a minor silver key. She opened the letter first. Her mother's handwriting gentle, steady, unmistakable. "My dear daughter, if you're reading this, it means you've been hurt so deeply you can hardly believe you're still alive. But remember, you are my blood, and we never bow to cruelty. I didn't leave you wealth, Ashley. I left you a choice. I hid part of our assets that your father could never find, not for money, but for freedom. One day, you can stand alone without asking anyone for mercy when needed. Take the key inside this box to Whitmore and Associates in Manhattan. They'll know what to do. And remember the most important thing. Money can keep you alive, but only pride will free you." Ashley lowered the letter, tears streaming uncontrollably. Her mother's voice filled the room, warm, steady, and strong enough to make her want to stand again. She opened the second envelope. Inside was a document, a Swiss bank account certificate, and a second note from Howard Whitmore, her mother's lawyer. The last line read, "If you are Ashley Holloway, contact me immediately. I've been waiting for you." The evening light filled the attic, brushing her tear-streaked face in gold. Ashley took a deep breath, looking around the house where she had seen her childhood, pain, and rebirth. She knew, from this moment on, everything would change. That night, she sat in the small room and reread her mother's letter a second time, a third, a fourth. Each time, her heart shifted, first with grief, then with gratitude, and finally, with resolve. Outside, the Hudson wind howled through the bare trees, but inside that old house, a small fire had begun to burn. One chapter of her life had closed, and that night, without a home, Ashley Holloway finally found one within herself. Morning in Hudson Valley was so still that Ashley could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the old doors. The air was still cold, but no longer bitter like the night before. A soft ray of sunlight filtered through the thin curtain and landed on the small metal box on the table. Ashley sat up, pulled on an old sweater she'd found in the closet, and stared at the box as if it was something alive, a vessel carrying both pain and warmth. She wasn't used to this feeling, the mix of ache and comfort. Every line in her mother's letter opened a door in her memory: the scent of morning tea, her mother's quiet laughter, the steady eyes that once told her, "Never let anyone make you forget your worth." Now she understood. Her mother had been preparing her for this day all along. On the table, Miriam Holloway's letter was neatly folded beside a minor silver key that glimmered faintly in the morning light. Under her palm, Ashley could feel the invisible weight of that inheritance, not just money, but faith, a mother's belief that her daughter would one day rise. She took a deep breath. "I'll make it, Mom," she whispered. "I promise." By noon, Ashley walked to the nearest town. She borrowed the public phone at the library and dialed the number written in the letter. A clear female voice answered. "Whitmore and Associates. This is Grace, Mr. Whitmore's assistant, speaking." Ashley hesitated. "My name is Ashley Holloway. I was told to call this number." There was a pause. Then Grace's tone softened. "Please hold, Miss Holloway. Mr. Whitmore has been expecting you." A few clicks later, a deep, steady voice came through, aged, but strong, like oak weathered by time. "Ashley Holloway," he said slowly, tasting the name like an old song. "It's good to hear your voice finally. I've been waiting for this call. I don't know what to say except, thank you," she said quietly. "My mother, she—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "She was one of the finest women I ever met. Come to my office at 9 a.m. on Monday. There's something I need to give you." Ashley nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'll be there." When she hung up, she stood for a long moment in the quiet library. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, snow melting from the eaves. She felt a reason to keep moving forward for the first time in a long time. 2 days later, Ashley returned to Manhattan. This time, she wasn't afraid. She took the early train, sitting by the window as the Hudson River drifted past. The soft golden light brushed her face, and for the first time in years, her reflection didn't look like a stranger. The Whitmore and Associates office sat in an old brick building near Wall Street, where red brick and crystal glass met, like the past, shaking hands with the present. Inside, it smelled of wood and old paper. A silver-haired secretary greeted her warmly. "Miss Holloway, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Right through that door, Ashley stepped in. Howard Whitmore was in his 70s, tall and composed, eyes bright behind thin glasses. He wore a navy suit and a grey tie, and when he saw her, he smiled as though greeting family. "You have your mother's eyes," he said softly. "I'd know them anywhere." Ashley sat down, hands clasped tightly. "I got a letter. I don't even know where to begin." "Begin by listening," he said, opening a drawer. He took out a thick envelope. "Your mother trusted me to keep this for 20 years. She said, 'Give it to Ashley when she truly needs it.' I think today is that day." He opened the envelope, pulled out a folder, and a single bank document. "This account is in your name, opened in Zurich in 2002. The current balance," he paused, smiling faintly, $723 million. Ashley's breath caught. The world seemed to go silent. How did she even earn that?" she asked. "With talent and courage," Whitmore said. "Your mother was an early investor in a tech company that later sold to a European conglomerate. She kept it hidden from your father. She said, 'I don't trust men who use money as chains. I want my daughter to use it as a key.'" Ashley sat speechless. The tears came quietly, not for the money, but for the love that had built such foresight. "You don't owe anyone gratitude," Whitmore said kindly. "Miriam didn't leave you wealth. She left you a tool. What you do with it, that's the real inheritance." Ashley looked up. "I don't want revenge. I want to live. Really live." "Then start by learning," Whitmore replied. "I have friends, experts in finance, design, and management. I'll introduce you. He handed her a business card. You might not believe in yourself yet, but I do. Strength isn't born, it's learned when you have no choice. Ashley left the office and stepped into the streets of Wall Street. The glass towers caught the sunlight. People rushed by, each with a purpose. For the first time, she didn't feel small among them. She knew she would build something not to prove herself, but to live in a way worthy of her mother's letter. The first months of Ashley's new life were spent walking a narrow bridge between two worlds, the darkness behind her and the uncertain light ahead. She rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, with windows overlooking the East River and the city's heartbeat below. By day, she attended the courses Whitmore arranged finance, business management, and brand design. By night, she studied notes, learning how the markets moved. Each number, each lesson, was a step out of the abyss. That's when she met Lawrence Payton, an investment advisor introduced by Whitmore. He was in his 40s, calm, intelligent, with a gaze that listened more than it spoke. "What do you want from all this money, Ashley?" he asked on their first meeting. She thought for a moment. "Freedom. It won't be easy," Payton said. "Money's the most beautiful trap there is. But if you're wise, it can also be your key. I'll help you use it that way." They started small, investing in sustainable funds, supporting women-led startups, and buying a small tailor shop in Soho. Ashley told no one who she really was. She just worked. She wanted to begin again as a person, not a story. The first month, she failed. 2 small ventures collapsed. She sat for hours over the books, fighting despair. But she reread her mother's letter whenever she felt like giving up. "Pride will save you." Those words pulled her back to her feet. She tried again, visiting workplaces, talking to employees, learning to see people instead of just numbers. And she discovered something. Kindness was its own form of strength in a ruthless world. Payton was impressed. "You learn fast," he said. "You have instinct." Miriam would be proud. Ashley smiled. "I just act like someone who's lost everything once and doesn't plan to lose again." Her name began circulating quietly in certain circles, the mysterious woman investing in brands with a soul. The media didn't know who she was. She moved with grace and purpose. One evening, Ashley stood by her window, gazing across the river at the lights of Manhattan. The city that once terrified her now looked different, still loud, still restless, but no longer menacing. She thought of Frank, the subway worker. She sent an anonymous donation to the same church that had sheltered her, with a note, "For anyone who needs half a sandwich to keep going." And she smiled. A year later, she opened her first brand, Holloway Atelier, a small fashion house in Soho where warm lights glowed and soft jazz played every night. No one knew who the founder was. They only knew every dress carried the message, "Dignity is the finest fabric." On opening night, Ashley stood behind the glass, watching people come and go. No one recognized her as Ashley Short, the woman once forced to kneel on a ballroom floor. And she didn't need them to. She stood there, in a simple dress, watching her reflection in the glass, strong, independent, unafraid of the light. Whitmore called to congratulate her. His voice was as warm as ever. "You see, Ashley, when a person stands alone, the world has no choice but to look at them differently. Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when I couldn't." "No, my dear," he replied. "You did that yourself. I only held the lantern so you could find the path." After the call, Ashley sat alone in her quiet apartment, watching Manhattan's lights shimmer across the river. For the first time in her life, she felt at peace, and somewhere in the still night air, she knew her mother was smiling. The morning light spilled through thin curtains in her small Brooklyn apartment, landing on a cluttered desk covered with papers and design sketches. Beside them sat a half-empty cup of coffee, a glowing laptop screen, and a thick leather notebook filled with lines of blue ink notes written through countless sleepless nights. While others saw her merely as an heiress, Ashley Holloway was busy learning to navigate the very world that had once cast her out. From the day she walked out of Howard Whitmore's law office, Ashley stepped straight into the world of finance, a world ruled by men, where every sentence was measured in profit and every handshake might hide a blade. She knew she had to learn fast, and she did with steel-like discipline. Lawrence Payton became her closest mentor, a seasoned businessman, quiet and composed. He didn't flatter or coddle her. The first time Ashley walked into a boardroom in Midtown Manhattan, he leaned close and said softly, "Don't let them see you shake. You don't need to know everything, just when to stay silent." That sentence became her compass. She observed. She listened. She took notes. And then, when she spoke, she asked questions sharp enough to cut through the noise. It didn't take long before people realized she wasn't just a woman with money. She was a woman who understood what it meant to earn it. At first, Ashley quietly invested in sustainable funds and women-led startups. But soon, she went further, acquiring small creative companies, forgotten brands with a spark of life still buried inside. Peyton asked, "Why not invest in real estate or something safer?" Ashley smiled. "Because I don't want to buy bricks. I want to buy dreams." He chuckled. "Dreams still cost capital. But I get it, you're not investing to get richer. You're investing to reclaim your voice." She nodded. "Exactly. I was once forced to be silent. Now I let my money speak." Month after month, Holloway Atelier grew. The first Soho boutique drew a loyal crowd. Then came another in Chicago. Her fashion wasn't just beautiful. It told a story about women's strength, softness without weakness, grace without submission. The press began to notice the mysterious founder behind the brand. They called her the Silent Heir. She never appeared on camera, never gave interviews. Her work spoke for her. But at night, in that same small apartment, she always reread her mother's letter, a ritual to keep her grounded. Money only matters if it sets you free. One morning, Peyton entered her office with a folder under his arm. "Whitmore says you're ready for a bigger move," he said. "Here's a list of 10 real estate firms in trouble. One of them you'll want to see." Ashley flipped through the list. The 7th name made her still. Short Properties Incorporated. She looked up. Peyton met her gaze and gave a slight nod. "Yes, their company. His company." Ashley said nothing. The curtains swayed gently in the wind. She set the paper down and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, glittering as always, unaware of the quiet storm forming in its midst. "What will you do?" Peyton asked. "Nothing," she said calmly. "Just watch. No revenge. I want to see how those who once called me worthless crumble under the weight of their own arrogance." From that day, she quietly followed the numbers. The short empire collapsed. Failed projects, drained accounts, mounting debt. Matthew Short, who once stood tall in the ballroom, now fought to keep his name above water. Ashley felt no joy, no pity, only a strange sense of peace. Because true justice doesn't shout, it simply waits. Ashley was no longer the same woman 2 years after receiving her mother's letter. Holloway Atelier now occupies a sunlit 2-story building in Soho, which was renovated from an old warehouse. Each morning, Ashley arrived with her coffee, her hair neatly tied, her voice calm but firm. Employees admired her, partners respected her, and even those who once dismissed her now called her Miss Holloway. But what made her happiest wasn't the success but the purpose. Each month, she set aside a share of profits to fund the Holloway Foundation, an organization helping women escape abusive relationships, providing shelter, job training, and legal aid. On weekends, Ashley often visited the shelters herself. There, she didn't talk about wealth or power. She told her own story without names, without titles, as a woman who once felt invisible. She told them, "No one can save you but yourself, but sometimes you need one person to believe you're worth saving. I had that person once. Today, I want to be that person for you." The clip of her speech went viral. The world heard Ashley Holloway's voice for the first time, and once was enough. Meanwhile, Short Properties was imploding in Midtown. Banks demanded payment. Investors withdrew. Headlines blared. The fall of Manhattan's real estate dynasty. Peyton sent her an article with a short message. "The past is closing itself." Ashley opened the article. There was a photo of Matt leaving the courthouse, gaunt, hollow-eyed. She closed the screen without a word. Inside, she felt closure. Back in her apartment, Jazz drifted from a bar across the street that night. Ashley opened the old box and unfolded her mother's letter once more. "My love, I believe you will turn pain into light." Ashley smiled softly. "Mom," she whispered, "I think the light's coming." The next morning, Whitmore called. "Ashley, I have news. The court has set the auction date for short properties, which is 2 weeks from now. Peyton thought you might want to attend." There was a pause. Then she said, "I'll be there. As a private bidder or through the company?" Ashley smiled. "Both. And I'll bid under my real name." Whitmore's laugh rumbled through the line. "You're ready, Ashley Holloway." When she hung up, Ashley looked out the window. The city gleamed back at her, dazzling, ruthless, alive. But now she wasn't afraid. She had walked through darkness. She had learned to use intellect instead of tears. That long-ago Christmas gala had been the grave where her dignity was buried. But soon in that same ballroom she would return, not as the fallen woman, but as the one who owned the floor. And this time, her shoes would shine brighter than every light in the room. Morning sunlight poured gently through the windows of the Holloway Atelier building on Broadway, painting the room in soft gold. Outside, New York was already awake. Car horns, jazz drifting from cafes, heels tapping against concrete, the rhythm of a city alive. But on the 10th floor, there was only quiet, the sound of a clock ticking, of curtains brushing softly in the wind. Ashley stood by the window, a cup of coffee warming her hands, her eyes tracing the small figures moving far below. She had always loved this moment, when the city's chaos paused long enough for her to hear her heartbeat. On her desk lay neat stacks of sketches and notes for Holloway Atelier, the renewal collection. A fashion line, yes, but in truth, a manifesto. On the wall hung a black and white photo of Miriam Holloway, young and fearless, framed in silver. Each morning, Ashley looked at it before she began her day. "I'm keeping my promise, Mom," she whispered. Over the last 2 years, Holloway Atelier had become more than a fashion house, a symbol. Its designs appeared on magazine covers worn by women who led, created, and dared. The world called it the brand of soft strength, and its founder, they called her the architect of dignity. The name came from a speech she gave at a design summit the year before, when she told a silent audience, "I once had everything taken from me, even the right to lift my head. And from that place, I learned, dignity is not something others give you. It's something you must guard, no matter the cost." From that moment, her voice carried far beyond fashion. But Ashley never chased fame. Whenever the media asked for interviews, she always replied, "This story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who was ever told to stay silent." She led her company as someone who knew how power should feel firm but kind. Every employee was called by name. Every decision weighed profit and principle. Peyton, now her CFO, often joked, "You're the only CEO in Manhattan who still uses conscience as company policy." She laughed. "Conscience is still the most valuable asset, don't you think?" Behind the smile, she knew every empire must one day face its test. That afternoon, in the boardroom, Peyton presented the latest report. "Our research confirms Short Properties has been ordered into liquidation. Their debts exceed $200 million. One of the assets includes the Hudson Yards project." Ashley nodded. "And the auction? 3 weeks from now. Grand Livingston Hotel." Silence. That place, that ballroom where her life once broke apart. Peyton looked at her carefully. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" Ashley smiled, her eyes steady. "I'm not going to avenge anything. I will witness an ending and the beginning of something new." She turned toward the window. Outside, Manhattan gleamed in the sunlight, the glass towers reflecting like 1,000 mirrors. This was the empire of pride, not of buildings or money, but of the simple, quiet truth. She could stand here now without fear, bowing, or needing anyone to save her. Later, she walked down to the atelier's workshop, where the hum of sewing machines filled the air. Rows of women worked, chatting and laughing as morning light poured over the tables. When they saw her, they paused, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Miss Holloway." "Good morning," she replied. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" Their smiles genuine, ordinary, full of life, were the purest power she had ever known. That evening, back in her apartment, Ashley found a letter on the table, Howard Whitmore's handwriting. Inside, a single line read, "Ashley, when you step into that room again, remember this. True power isn't making others kneel. It's standing tall without needing to prove anything. Ashley smiled softly. That was the final lesson she had been walking toward all along. The morning of the auction arrived with a clear blue sky. Sunlight glinted off the glass facade of the Grand Livingston Hotel, the same hotel that once witnessed her humiliation. The city's elite gathered financiers, journalists, investors aware that this was more than a sale. It was a symbol, the fall of one empire and the quiet rise of another. Ashley arrived early. She wore a simple white suit, low heels, and neatly tied hair. No jewelry, entourage, or spectacle, just a woman walking straight, calm, self-possessed. When she entered the lobby, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered her name. Cameras turned. There she is, Ashley Holloway. Her name spread through the hall like a soft chime. Ashley smiled faintly, neither hiding nor hurrying. Step by step, she walked down the long corridor toward the ballroom, the same room where she had once knelt under the glare of 100 eyes. This time, the lights were just as bright, but they no longer blinded her. At the center stood the auction podium, surrounded by rows of velvet chairs. In the front row sat Matthew Short, his face thin, hair graying, the weight of failure pressing on his shoulders. When their eyes met, he looked down. No arrogance, only silence. Ashley held his gaze for a brief moment, then moved on. She sat in the second row, placed her bag down, and signed the bidding form. Her hand did not tremble. The auction began. The moderator's voice rang out, steady and rhythmic numbers climbing, hands rising. The air was tense, charged. Ashley waited, patient. When the Hudson Yards property came up, the room stirred. Bids flow. 10 million, 15, 20. Peyton leaned over. Shall we? Ashley nodded. 22 million. The crowd turned. Whispers spread. The moderator asked, "Bid a name?" She answered clearly, "Holloway Atelier Holdings." The number climbed again, 23, 24. Only two bidders remained at 30 million, a Chicago corporation and her. The room held its breath. Then Ashley spoke. 35 million. The moderator repeated, 35 million from Holloway Atelier Holdings. Any higher? Silence. 3 sharp strikes of the gavel. Bang, bang, bang. Ashley Holloway had just bought the crown jewel of the Short Empire, the very ground where Matthew once built his name. For a long second, the room was silent. Then came the flashes, the murmurs, the rising wave of voices. A reporter stood and said, "Miss Holloway, do you have a statement?" Ashley smiled, calm, luminous. "I only want to say this. Every ending can become a beginning, if you're brave enough to write it that way." The room fell still. Matthew bowed his head. A single tear slipped down his cheek, unnoticed by all but her. But Ashley hadn't come to see him fall. She stood, thanked the moderator, and walked out as the cameras followed. Outside, the air was fresh. The wind carried the scent of spring blossoms from the square nearby. She looked up the sky above. Manhattan was cloudless and endless. Grand Livingston had once been the grave of her dignity. Today, she was the witness to her light. She walked down the marble steps, her heels clicking steady, assured. No longer the trembling steps of a woman humiliated, but the measured rhythm of someone who had forgiven her past by living beautifully. Behind her, reporters called her name. Ashley didn't turn back. She had already walked through the length of destiny, and ahead waiting quietly was the rest of justice. Not the kind written in vengeance or tears, but the kind born of truth and carried by pride. Summer rain poured over Manhattan the following evening, each drop hissing as it hit the warm pavement, turning the city into a shimmering blur of light and loneliness. The air smelled of metal, exhaust, and the quiet ache of millions of souls hurrying for shelter. Ashley sat in the back seat of Peyton's black car, watching the raindrops trace paths down the fogged window. On her phone, the headlines from that morning's auction filled every feed. Ashley Holloway officially acquires Short Properties. From victim to victor. The extraordinary rise of the silent heir. She read each line without pride, only peace. Justice had done its work. But somewhere deep inside, there was still one thing left unfinished. Peyton drove in silence. When the light turned red, he glanced over. "You're sure about this? You don't have to see him. There's nothing left to say." Ashley kept her gaze on the glass, where neon lights rippled through puddles. I know, but that shadow will follow me forever if I don't speak today. The car stopped outside a small cafe in Lower Manhattan, the place Matt had chosen. Its windows glowed with soft amber light, fogged by the rain. Inside, it looked ordinary, peaceful. But to Ashley, it was the last stage of a very long play. She stepped out into the drizzle. Cool air brushed against her coat as the doorbell chimed softly when she entered. Matt sat in the back corner, near the window. He looked smaller, older, worn out his cheap suit, unable to hide his slumped shoulders or the hollow eyes that had once gleamed with arrogance. When Ashley approached, he stood. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Only the sound of rain on glass and the faint clinking of spoons in coffee cups filled the space. "Thank you for coming," Matt said, his voice hoarse, each word dragging like a wound. Ashley sat down, setting her babe beside her expression calm. "I didn't come for gratitude." He nodded, a bitter smile flickering. "I know. I just needed to look at the person I broke to remember what the end of arrogance looks like." Ashley said nothing. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. "When you left," Matt continued, eyes on the street, "I thought I'd won. I told everyone you were weak, that you couldn't live without me. I didn't understand that I started losing everything when you walked away." Ashley's voice was soft, steady. "You didn't lose because I left. You lost because you never learned to hold on to anything but your ego." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I thought power meant making people kneel. Now I know real power is being able to bow without feeling ashamed." She didn't reply. Outside, a siren wailed through the rain, red light flickering across their faces. Two people once bound by a love twisted by control, now sitting across from each other as strangers in the same city they once ruled and ruined together. "Will you keep destroying me?" Matt asked quietly. Ashley met his eyes. "No. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. I just brought back what belonged to my mother and maybe a little piece of my own survival." Matt lowered his head. "Thank you for not taking revenge." "Don't thank me," she said. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating their faces for a single heartbeat. Then the world fell back into shadow. Matt looked up again, voice trembling. "Ashley, I won't ask for forgiveness. But if there's anything I can do to make this right—" "There isn't," she interrupted softly. "Forgiveness isn't something you can ask for. It's a road you have to walk alone." He pressed his lips together, nodded faintly. She stood, putting on her coat. "Live better, Matt, because I won't look back a second time." When she walked out, the door closed behind her with a slight chime, leaving him alone amid the golden light and drifting scent of coffee. He watched her figure blur into the rain, then bowed his head into his hands. No sobs, just the silence of a man who finally understood that everything he once thought eternal had dissolved into water on a city street. That night, Ashley walked through the rain along the avenue. The drops were gentle now, not cold, but cleansing. Each step echoed steadily, confidently. The city that had once buried her now played background music for her freedom. She passed the old Short Properties building. Its glass facade was empty. Its sign was removed, and the frame rusted. Under the dim streetlight, her reflection overlapped with its hollow windows, past and present meeting silently. She placed her hand on the cold glass. "Thank you," she whispered, "because without this pain, I'd never have learned how to love myself." Then she turned away and walked on. A week later, the news broke. Thomas Short had died in a private hospital. Diane Short was under investigation for concealing assets. The media called it the fall of the Short dynasty. Ashley read the article, set the paper down, and said nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, only closure. Later, in Whitmore's office, she handed over legal documents. "I want to do this properly," she said. "Their house let them keep it for the rest of their lives. After that, it will be transferred to the Holloway Foundation. I want it to become a shelter for women escaping abuse." Whitmore looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "Ashley, some people seek revenge with fire. You've chosen to seek it with light." She smiled faintly. "It's not revenge, Howard. I want justice that still looks human." On her way home, Ashley walked through Central Park. The rain had stopped. Droplets clung to the leaves, glittering under the sunset. Children chased pigeons. People laughed. The city exhaled. She sat on a bench, breathing in the damp scent of earth. Freedom no longer felt like a distant dream. It was here, in her chest, her calm pulse, and the silence after the storm. Her phone buzzed. Peyton, Whitmore just called. The papers are finalized. The Park Avenue house becomes the foundation's main shelter next month. Thank you, she said softly. And Matt? He asked. He'll have to take care of himself. A pause. Then Peyton asked, do you feel lighter now? Yes, Ashley said. But not because he fell, because I don't anymore. They both chuckled. Back in her apartment that evening, she looked out over Manhattan, the skyline glittering like artificial constellations. Inside, only a small golden lamp glowed over her desk. She opened the old box again and reread the last line of her mother's letter. You'll know you've grown strong when you no longer need to see someone else hurt to feel tall. Ashley set the letter down and nodded. Outside, rain began to fall again, a soft, steady drizzle against the glass. But inside Ashley Holloway, the sky was finally apparent. A crisp October morning dawned over Manhattan, the sky startlingly blue. Sunlight glinted off the marble facade of the old Park Avenue mansion, once home to the Short family. A new sign hung above its doors. Holloway Haven, a center for women and children in crisis. A line had already formed outside. Reporters, guests, women whose lives Ashley had touched, and strangers who came simply because they were grateful she existed. Ashley stepped out of the car, wearing an ivory dress and a long coat, nothing extravagant, just quiet elegance. Her eyes shone, and her stride carried that familiar blend of grace and resolve. Howard Whitmore was waiting near the gate, leaning on his blackwood cane. When he saw her, he smiled. Ashley, your mother must be smiling down on you today. Ashley's voice was soft but steady. I hope so, Howard. I want this place to live not as a monument, but as a heartbeat. They walked together through the front garden, once a party courtyard, now reborn as a peaceful haven filled with white daisies, maple trees, and wooden benches. On the front wall, etched into stone, were the words, "No one is born to suffer forever. Here, we begin again." The opening ceremony was simple. No flashing lights, no fashion displays, just a microphone, a few rows of chairs, and over 100 people waiting in silence. Ashley stepped up to the mic. Among the crowd, she spotted Frank, the subway worker who had once shared his sandwich with her on a freezing night. His hair was grayer now, but his smile was proud. She took a deep breath and began. Years ago, I stood in this house, but it wasn't a home back then. It was a cage. I used to think justice meant making someone pay. I know true justice is when you turn the place that once broke you into a place where others can heal. Applause rippled softly through the crowd, gentle, heartfelt. Ashley went on, her voice calm, carried by the breeze. Every room here bears the name of a woman who changed my life. One of them is my mother, Miriam Holloway, who taught me that dignity is the only inheritance no one can take away. And some rooms are named after people I once resented, because they taught me that pride isn't just standing tall, but finding the courage to forgive so you can keep walking forward. Beside her, Whitmore quietly wiped his eyes. Ashley continued, "Someone once asked me, what does it mean to forgive the one who made you suffer? I said, it doesn't mean they deserve forgiveness. It means you deserve peace." The crowd fell silent, then rose in a standing ovation that echoed through the hall. After the ceremony, Ashley walked down the bright new corridors. Each room is painted in warm hues, and the walls are lined with photos of smiling women. From the kitchen drifted the scent of baked bread and coffee. Outside in the courtyard, children painted and laughed. She stopped at room 7, once her own bedroom in the Short mansion. Now, a wooden sign hung on the door. The Holloway room, for those beginning again. She placed her hand on the handle and opened the door. Sunlight poured in through the window, washing over the walls where, years ago, she had seen only her hollow reflection. A new photo hung there, a woman standing by a window, lifting her face toward the light. Ashley smiled. The place that had once buried her now gave others a chance to live. That afternoon, She stepped out of Holloway Haven onto Park Avenue. The city shimmered after the previous night's rain. Towers reflected across wet pavement. Church bells tolled in the distance, mingling with the hum of traffic, the soft music of a day that had found its balance. Peyton caught up with her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Your speech this morning's going viral," he said, half grinning. "You've officially become a symbol, Ashley." She chuckled. "I don't want to be a symbol. I want someone to hear and believe they can live again." "That's exactly why they'll follow you," Peyton replied. "Not because you're powerful, because you're real." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "You know, when I sat in that cafe with Matt that night, I realized something strange. We can't rewrite the past, but can change the story's tone. I'm not the victim in it anymore." He smiled. "No, you're the storyteller now." They both laughed, the sound light and honest, the laughter of 2 people who had finally closed a long, heavy chapter. That evening, Ashley stood by the window back in her Brooklyn apartment. The skyline glittered like scattered stars, and on her table lay the morning paper. On the front page, a photo of her speaking, beneath the headline, "From Pain to Legacy, Ashley Holloway and Justice in the Light." She didn't read it. She folded the paper and placed it beside her mother's framed photograph. Then she poured a glass of wine, opened the window, and let the autumn breeze drift through the room. In the quiet, she could almost hear echoes of the past, the click of heels on marble floors, the cruel laughter, the distant music of a ballroom. But now, they were only echoes, faint, harmless. "No one," she whispered, "has the power to make me bow again, not even memory." The phone rang. Howard Whitmore. "Miss Holloway," he said warmly, "I just received a letter from City Hall. The mayor wants to honor you with the New York Humanitarian of the Year award." Ashley smiled. "I don't need titles, Howard. I want one less person to go through what I did." "That's exactly why you deserve it, my dear." When the call ended, she sat quietly for a moment, then reached for her old journal, which had carried her through every chapter of survival. She wrote, "Day 1828 since leaving Park Avenue. I have survived. I have forgiven. And today, I have truly begun to live." She closed the journal, leaned back, and let her eyes close. In the silence, she heard her mother's voice, gentle, proud. "You used money to open doors, not to build walls." Outside, Manhattan pulsed as it always did, restless, brilliant, unending. But tonight, the city felt still. Above it, thousands of lights glittered like artificial stars, and among them glowed one steadier, warmer than the rest. The light of justice, shaped by compassion. The light of Ashley Holloway, the woman who had walked out of darkness so others could find their way home. 7 years had passed since Ashley Holloway opened the doors of Holloway Haven. New York had changed, but not as much as she had. Every morning, Ashley still rose before dawn. She loved the hour before the city woke, when only the East River murmured against its banks and a pale blush of light crept through her window. She brewed her coffee, read the news, and sat by her wooden desk where her mother's letter rested in its glass frame. On the wall were photographs marking 10 years of a life rebuilt, the opening of Holloway Haven, the conferences she'd spoken at, the faces of women she'd embraced after they'd found safety again. One photo stood apart. She and Howard Whitmore, smiling, his hand resting on his cane. Howard had passed away the year before. In his will, he'd left her his old fountain pen, the one engraved with the words, "Justice with Compassion." Ashley kept it on her desk as a daily reminder. Holloway Atelier had since expanded to 8 cities: Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, and more. But what made her proudest wasn't profit. The Holloway Foundation had helped over 2,000 women rebuild their lives. She no longer hid from the public eye. Once a year, she spoke at major events about economic empowerment, not in slogans, but with the quiet authority of someone who had fallen and learned to stand again. While sorting through emails one morning, she noticed a beige envelope among the stack, handwritten, "No return address." The handwriting made her heart tighten. "Matt." She opened it. The first line made her pause. "Ashley, if you're reading this, it's been 7 years since the day you made me face myself. You may not believe it, but for every one of those days, I've tried to become the man you once hoped I could be. Ashley sat down, reading on. I lost everything: reputation, wealth, family. But what I gained was a second chance. I went to rehab, then volunteered at a community center in the Bronx. Eventually, they hired me. I build affordable housing, help people find homes again. I'm not telling you this for pity. I tell you because that day, the day you stood up, saved my life. If you hadn't, I'd have died worshipping my own pride. I'm not asking you to come back. I only want to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. If someday you'd want to hear the story of a man who truly changed, you can find me here at the community center on 14th Street, the one with the wall painted like a sunrise. Matt. She lowered the letter, silent. The ticking of the clock filled the room. 7 years, long enough for a man to fall to the bottom and climb back, grain by grain. Ashley rose and went to the window. Below, the city glittered, its light no longer harsh, but warm. The past wasn't calling her backward anymore. It was asking to be closed gently. She picked the letter up again. On the desk, Whitmore's pen glinted in the sunlight. Softly, she whispered toward the ceiling, "Howard, maybe justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it lives in a letter that dares to bow." That afternoon, Ashley walked to 14th Street. No car, assistant, or appointment, just her and the hum of the city. The community center stood between two old brick buildings, its walls covered in bright graffiti. By the time she arrived, the sun had dipped low. On the southern wall stretched a vast mural, a sunrise painted in shades of gold and orange, with rings of light radiating outward. Beneath it were the words, "Forgiveness builds what pride destroys." Ashley stood before it, quiet. Then a voice came from behind her. "I didn't think you'd come." She turned. Matt stood in a blue work shirt with a hard hat in hand. His face was lined, older, but his eyes were calm, clear. "You wrote that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No. A kid from the neighborhood did," he said. "If you've ever broken something, you should rebuild twice as much." "I just helped him paint," Ashley chuckled. "That sounds about right for you." They stood side by side, looking at the mural. Somewhere nearby, children played ball. An old jazz tune drifted from an upstairs window. To anyone else, it was an ordinary New York evening, but to them, it was extraordinary. "How are you?" she asked. "Better than I've ever been," Matt said. "Not because I have more, because I need less." "And you really work here?" "Yeah. Teaching people to build, repair, and start over. I don't sit behind desks anymore. It feels good to make something with my hands." She studied him. The man she saw now was not the ghost of her pain, but someone learning to be kind. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Yes," he answered immediately, "but not the way you think. I don't regret losing everything. I regret making you lose yourself before you found your way back." Ashley said nothing. The mural glowed softly under the streetlight, streaks of color fading into dusk. "You know," she said quietly, "my mother once told me, you can't truly love until you understand what it means to have hurt someone. Maybe now you understand." Matt nodded, his voice low. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to begin again, not as the man I was, but as someone grateful to have been forgiven." Ashley looked at him, eyes damp, but shining. "I don't need an apology anymore, Matt. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means we can look at each other and no longer wish for either of us to hurt." They stood there, under the warm glow of the streetlights, the noise of the city soft around them. Ashley reached out, brushing her fingers against the painted wall. "It's beautiful," she said. Matt smiled. "Thank you for coming." "And thank you," she replied gently, "for not stopping at regret." Then she turned and walked toward the Manhattan Bridge, each step steady, free. Behind her, the streetlight illuminated the mural until it looked like a real sunrise burning through the night. The river wind brushed against her skin, carrying a trace of warmth. She felt completely, quietly released for the first time in many years. No more anger, no more fear, only peace, the final justice that compassion brings. Autumn in Manhattan still smelled the same damp leaves, roasted coffee, and a faint trace of salt from the Hudson. Ashley Holloway was now 50. Her hair was short, streaked with silver, and her eyes clear. Steady held the calm of someone who had survived every kind of storm. She lived in a small house by the river, close enough to the city to hear its heartbeat, but far enough to feel peace. Each morning, she made coffee, opened the window, and watched the sun climb above the water. Sometimes, she sat for hours, just watching the light move across the wall, measuring time by the rhythm of her breath. On her desk still lay the same old relics: Howard Whitmore's fountain pen, her mother Miriam's photograph, and Matt's letter worn at the creases but never forgotten. But next to them were new things too. A photo of women from the Holloway Foundation, former survivors now leading small businesses, mentoring the next generation. She still oversaw Holloway Atelier, though she rarely appeared in public. Most of her time now belonged to Holloway Haven, which had spread nationwide. Wherever she went, she did only one thing: she listened to stories of pain, of healing, of laughter that came after long nights of fear. When asked for her secret, she always said, "I don't heal anyone. I remind them they've always been strong enough to heal themselves." Ashley received a letter from the New York Department of Culture one October afternoon. The city was unveiling a monument, the Wall of Forgiveness, inspired by the sunrise mural at the Bronx Community Center where Matt worked. They invited her as the woman who began the spirit of it. She almost declined until she remembered Howard's words: "Sometimes, returning to where you once fell is how you finish the journey." So she went. The day was bright and clear. The new wall stretched 10 meters long in a riverside park, engraved with the names of hundreds who had changed their communities through compassion. At its center was a sun, an echo of Matt's old mural, expanded and eternal. When Ashley arrived, the crowd was already gathered: reporters, volunteers, and many faces she recognized. Matt was there too, standing by the front row. He was in his 50s now, with a simple shirt and calm eyes, the quiet dignity of a man who had spent a lifetime rebuilding, one wall at a time. When he saw her, he bowed slightly and smiled. She returned the smile light as the breeze. No weight, no shadow, just two people who had once walked through fire and now stood on the other side of it, grateful to still be alive. The ceremony began. The mayor gave a short speech, then invited Ashley to speak. She stepped up, resting her hand against the cool stone. "There was a time," she began, "when I thought forgiveness was weakness, that to forget was to lose. But I learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering everything, and still choosing not to let it define you." The wind stirred the golden leaves. Her voice softened. "Justice isn't only punishment. It's also a chance. If I had chosen destruction back then, the world would have one more broken soul. Instead, I chose to let him live and learn. And because of that choice, this wall stands here today." Applause swept through the park. Matt lowered his head, tears glistening on his face. After the ceremony, they met by the river. No drama, no grand words. Just two people standing quietly, watching the water drift by. "Will you stay in New York?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I'm moving to New Mexico. There's a project building homes for migrant families. I want to spend what's left of my life doing that." She smiled. "Good. You found your reason to stay in the world." He nodded, then, after a long pause, said, "Thank you, Ashley. Not for forgiving me, but for never giving up on the idea that people can change." She looked toward the horizon. "I believe that because if my mother hadn't believed it, she would have left me nothing." A soft wind lifted the fallen leaves around them. Ashley tilted her face toward the sun. Its light poured gold across the river like liquid fire. In that moment, she felt it completely. Every scar, every tear, every collapse had carried her to this peace where she could smile without trembling. A few years later, Ashley retired. She moved to a small town in upstate New York, near Mirror Lake, a wooden cottage with lavender along the porch and morning fog that wrapped the hills. She lived alone, but never lonely. Each month, she returned to the city for a few days, visiting Holloway Haven and teaching a small class on leading with kindness. She called her students "my daughters of light." Sometimes she received letters from Matt. They were short, gentle stories about the houses he helped build, the families he'd met. He never asked for more, only sent blessings, and every time, Ashley read them, folded them carefully, and placed them in the same drawer beside all the others, lined up like sleeping butterflies. One spring evening, sunlight spilled through her window. Ashley sat on the porch, pouring tea. From far away came the sound of church bells. On the table before her, a photo of her mother, Howard, and the sun wall. She smiled. "I've gone farther than my fear ever thought I could, Mother." Then she opened her journal and wrote the last entry of her life's work. "I've learned that justice isn't reclaiming what was lost, but turning loss into meaning. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't make us weak, it makes us free. And I've learned that sometimes light doesn't fall from the sky, it rises from where the heart once broke." The wind stirred the lavender, filling the air with fragrance. Ashley set down her pen, closed her eyes, and heard the birds calling over the lake. In her mind, her mother's voice drifted back tender, like a lullaby. "You used money to open doors, not to build walls." The sunset poured gold through the room, brushing her face, the face of a woman who had lost much but kept the only things that mattered: dignity, kindness, and faith in human change. A single pink streak lingered across the sky when the sun dipped behind the hills. Ashley whispered to herself, to her mother, and to all the souls who had once hurt as she had, "At last, I've come home to the light." Far away, the city began to glow. One window at a time, Manhattan lit up like a constellation, every light, a story rewritten through courage, compassion, and love. And though Ashley Holloway's story had ended, the light she left behind still lived on. In everyone who had ever learned that to forgive is not to surrender, but to be free. If this story touched you, click like, share it, and subscribe, so we can keep telling stories of grace, redemption, and the quiet strength of the human heart. I'm Kechuit Me Thor. See you in the following story, where another soul somewhere in America is learning to find the light again.